Presentation of Idaho Reports on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
The big races attracted a lot of attention, but came through with little theatrics. Down the ticket, however, voters served up a full plate of surprises that left journalists and operatives scratching their heads.
And the legislative races didn't disappoint either. We have 11 new representatives, 4 new senators, each with their eye on November and hopes that they can come here next year and reshape the State House and possibly even leadership.
I'm Melissa Davlin.
And I'm Aaron Coons. Idaho Reports starts now.
Welcome to Idaho Reports.
Well, he's the one guy you want to talk to after an election, and we'll have him on this week's show. Retiring Secretary of State Ysursa joins Bill Manny of the Idaho Statesman and Betsy Russell of the Spokesman-Review to help us make sense of what happened in Tuesday's primary election. Dr. Jim Weatherby, well, he's not here. He's at an undisclosed location, but we've been told he's watching closely.
And there's plenty to talk about this week. We spent Tuesday night waiting for results with the Secretary of State candidates, trying to analyze what happened and figure out what the repercussions for future elections might be. We'll take you back into the heart of Tuesday night in just a sec.
But first, let's get you caught up on the week. By now, you've probably heard the results. Senator Jim Risch beat his challenger. Representative Raul Labrador took on his 4 opponents and won. Representative Simpson was underestimated by the national media, but handily beat Brian Smith. Governor Otter held off Senator Fulcher, though Fulcher did win in Idaho's 3 biggest counties. Lieutenant Governor Brad Little decimated Jim Schmelik. Attorney General Lawerence Wasden picked a fight, then knocked out his opponent. And on the Democratic side, no big surprises. Everyone who was expected to win did. Nels Mitchell, Shirley Ringo, Richard Stallings, Burt Marley, and Holly Woodings breezed through. And in one possible competitive race, Deborah Silver of Twin Falls beat her competition by the biggest percentage of any statewide candidate.
Sherry Ibarra wins in an upset for Republican superintendent candidate. Lawerence Denney comes out on top in a 4-way Secretary of State race, and Brandon Wolf barely edges out Todd Hatfield in a nail-biter for controller. Statewide, voter turnout was about 25%, but that varied county to county. In Clark County, for example, voter turnout was 78%, but in Ada, it was just 21%.
And one factor in that low turnout might be the state's relatively new closed primary for the Republicans. The turnout in the primary election 20 years ago was 33%. We'll have more analysis on this later in the show. But first, we spent Tuesday evening with 3 Republican Secretary of State candidates. Here's how the evening played out through their eyes.
When we talk about it in an election, we're talking about the philosophy or the policy issue on a broad level. Here is where rubber meets the road. 181,000 pieces of paper, sometimes times 2 if we have 2 pages, is a huge amount of work. There are times where the 2 sides kind of butt heads. We're trying to run an election and we're stressed out and we're working on it, and the candidates don't understand what we're going through, and vice versa. The candidates need stuff and need information, and our staff isn't always fully appreciative of the pressure that they're under. Having gone through it, I have a much better appreciation than I did before I started the process. The number of people involved is huge, and the number of times you're repeating a process. If we're going to have 500,000 people vote, and you want it to be perfect.
We started early, clear back in October, and I think having the feet on the ground early, I think helped us out, and certainly I think having the Duck Dynasty event, we spent a lot of money advertising early, and I think that helped us in the long run.
Thomas Zuha has voted.
I think voters went to the polls and thought about who was running for governor. I think that a lot of people that walked into the voting booth they were very lucky if they recognized one name of a person running for Secretary of State.
I think a lot of it is name ID. Certainly, we started out with an advantage there, and the others, I don't think any of them had enough money to really gain the name ID that they needed.
It seemed like almost everybody we were able to touch in some way, meet with, talk to, write to. We had very good results. But in order to communicate with people, it takes resources, it takes money. And in a race below the level of governor, it's real hard to raise it.
It's been really interesting. I've gotten to see, even among some of my opponents and the other candidates, a different side of people because we travel in a pack, and so you get to know each other pretty well, and you get to see those people you knew beforehand, but other people you didn't, and sometimes the image that's portrayed of them from the outside is not necessarily when you get to know them one-on-one. I think that's one of the big things. Candidates get judged by what they see in the media, what they read online, but when people have that face-to-face interaction, which is where it's so important for us to travel around and meet people face-to-face, you know, they say shoe leather counts, and it's because that human interaction makes a huge difference. You know,
when you have that many people in a race, 4 or 5 people in a race, just about anything can happen. And so I say congratulations to those people who have succeeded. And it's there's nothing quite like this process. It can be daunting and arduous and difficult and challenging.
I'm more prepared to be Secretary of State than I was to run to be Secretary of State. And so it is interesting because the way we select any of these offices is an interesting process. I anticipate that I will never go through an interview process that is quite this grueling.
Just looking at the numbers, you know, I think I've been the conservative candidate, and certainly I think the conservative base in Idaho is about the numbers that I'm pulling. You know, I think the lands issue is an issue that has resonated with a lot of people in Idaho, and certainly I think we have to focus on the lands as well as the elections are certainly an important part of this race as well.
Well, there are 5 votes on the land board, and so no one voice is the dominant voice, and you also have to recognize that on the land board, it's not unfettered discretion, that there's very consistent constitutional sideboards that we have to comply with. So you cannot just do whatever you want to do. We have a long history. The law is clear in many respects, and we have a fiduciary responsibility to the school children. It is their best interest to whom we must look, not our own political viewpoints.
Looks like right now there's a good chance that Lawerence Denney will be our next Secretary of State, and I look forward to working with him. The election cycle doesn't care that there's going to be a new Secretary of State next year. There's no on-the-job training. There will be people in January asking for advice on how to run their elections, and we'll have likely a new clerk or 2 in the process. We're going to need some building up and moving forward, and if everybody's learning, that puts us in a tough spot.
There has been a number of instances in which more aggressive, on the edge kind of thinking has been doused in many ways. So, you know, that's a kind way of saying that I think that the people have spoken here. I was handing out literature, and I had a number of people that night say to me, well, I don't believe in politics. And that's always a surprising statement to me, because politics determines where the streets are you live on, what kind of house you live in, what kind of car you drive, where the grocery store is. Politics determines all of those things about your life. So we live in a system where we have the right power and opportunity to express ourselves through that political process.
And God bless you.
The one great feature of our system is public participation. The one greatest weakness is public participation, or lack thereof.
We've got a lot to talk about and some of the smartest people in the state here to analyze. We've got Betsy Russell from the Spokesman-Review, Bill Manny of the Idaho Statesman, and retiring Secretary of State Ben Ysursa. So let's start with the Secretary of State's race. Betsy, what were the factors in Lawerence Denney's win?
Well, it was a 4-way race, and there's been quite a bit of speculation over the results that had one of the 4, Mitch Toryanski, not run, then the second place finisher, Phil McGrane, very likely would have won. But instead, we saw Denney come out with the win with 37%. And if you look at their campaign finance reports, it looks like he way outraised the other candidates, but actually he didn't. Practically all the money he brought in was in ticket sales for Duck Dynasty, and then practically all the money he spent was to pay for that event. He told me they just broke even on that. So money actually was not really a big factor in that race.
So what was it? Was it name recognition? Was it campaigning? What happened?
I think that we had 4 candidates who had very little name recognition, and Denney probably had more than most. On the other hand, he also had some negatives, but he had a base and he turned it out. And he was aligned with this slate of candidates challenging Republican incumbents, kind of mainstream incumbents, across the ticket. They didn't do so well, but he did because the vote was divided up into so many chunks that his became more significant.
Yeah, I think the Denney had a solid base, 4-way race. It's going to dilute the anti-Denney vote, and so even though he had a lot of negatives, you had a lot of people dividing up the other votes.
Did negative context here play anything or any role at all into the races? I know that a couple of candidates did come out kind of strong, particularly Toryanski during the debate that was here at Idaho Public Television.
Yeah, I don't really think that helped him much. He ended up as a poor 4th place finisher. He really didn't do very well, even though he raised quite a bit of money and campaigned pretty hard and put a whole lot of his own money into that.
And McGrane was the good government candidate. He had the endorsement of all the clerks. He had the endorsement of the incumbent, and yet that didn't put him over the top.
I got to interject a little bit on the race that I'm very familiar with, but I'd have to agree with everything that was said here, and I think Representative Denney acknowledged it himself. You've got a base of 35 to 40%, not necessarily going to win a 2-way race, but is very solid in a 4-way race. And I think the anti-federal sentiment in the state of Idaho, both on Obamacare and, of course, the federal lands issue, I think resonates with a significant portion of the people, and is enough to do that in the primary. But I think the solid base and the low turnout. We had 25% statewide. Some of these counties are in the 21s, and you get your base out, and you can win, especially in a 4-way race, and I believe that's what happened.
And the 4th candidate in the race, Evan Frazier, was a factor as well. He was kind of the stealth candidate. He knows a lot about elections and campaigning, and he campaigned very strategically and knew which parts of the state he was likely to take, and he ran 3rd.
Well, I want to talk about that a little bit. How did these candidates, and I'm not just talking about Secretary of State, I'm talking about Superintendent, Lieutenant Governor, Governor, how did they approach the different parts of the state differently? I mean, because from our point of view, we saw some blanket campaigns and some very targeted campaigns, but what did you see, Betsy?
Well, I mean, if you look at the numbers in the Lieutenant Governor race, Brad Little just swept that. He had a huge margin statewide, but you could see that there were pockets in the state where his opponent was stronger, and those were the pockets where he's from. North Central Idaho, North Idaho, where the federal lands issue played much more strongly than it did perhaps in the rest of the state. That's one example.
Is this something campaign managers should pay attention to? I mean, this is how you run a campaign in a geographically diverse state like Idaho?
I'm no expert on that. I think everybody's going to be looking at these results and making that calculus. I was going to note that Ben's point about the federal lands issue may have played a role for Denney. I'm not sure it had much effect across other parts of the state. You saw statewide candidates who were running on the federal land, the state lands takeover. None of them except for Denney was the nominee. North Idaho is probably an exception, and Betsy might want to comment on that. But Rocky Barker in the Statesman was reporting on how some candidates who in fact were on the opposite side of that issue did pretty well. Central Idaho, Western Idaho, and so the federal lands issue, the states' rights issue, did not seem to have the kind of currency that we might have thought it would have had coming out of the legislative session.
Yeah, I think there's certainly some merit to that. However, the number of candidates, it did give them a solid base in that Secretary of State's race. In the superintendent's race, that to me was a complete wild card. I had personally, and I keep tabs of things pretty close, I had no idea that Sherry Barra was going to pull that one off the way she did.
And the reason you're saying this is because we've got 4 relatively unknown candidates, and we don't have any kind of history with them to draw on. So, I mean, what was it? What was the turning point?
Well, I don't know. I was surprised by that. Some of the conventional wisdom is, as you go around, you hit the Lincoln Day circuits and on the Republican side, obviously, and try to get some folks out and build a base. You had 4 unknown folks here. Money was certainly not to be had by any of them to have some great grandiose campaign. So I really don't know what the factor was at that point.
How much of it was just her name stood out in a slate of men? I mean, you have 3 men, and then you have not only a woman, but a Basque woman.
You have a woman who stood out in a field of people who are not well known, who are not politicians, who have not run campaigns. So what are voters looking for someone to stand out of the crowd? I've heard a lot of people speculating that it's her name and her gender helped. Now, in a 4-way race where you have three men, 4 candidates unknown, that could be a big factor. If you're talking about the fall where she's running against another woman, a tested campaigner, someone who has run a statewide campaign and didn't lose that much to Tom Luna last time around when she ran, I think the Republicans have given the Democrats a huge opportunity to take back a statewide office.
I expected John Einen to do much better than he did. He distinguished himself from the field in the superintendent's race by being the only candidate who was opposed to Common Core, kind of the only candidate appealing to the conservative base, the Tea Party people, and I thought perhaps that would play in his favor in the same way that it did in a 4-way race for Lawerence Denney, but it didn't. And I don't know if that's because he is just so unknown and people really didn't grasp that, or because schools are different. And perhaps when it comes to superintendent of schools, people aren't thinking just ideologically. They're thinking about somebody who's going to run their kids' schools.
On the flip side of all of this, though, we had some very well-known names in the, for instance, the 2nd Congressional District, for the governor's race. These are people we knew, people who've had a track record, and I don't think a lot of people were surprised necessarily in the 2nd Congressional District, but some felt that maybe Otter had a fight, uphill battle here to go, but yet when you look at the election results, he won pretty higher than I think some people would have thought, although it's still pretty darn close.
It was pretty close for a sitting governor seeking a 3rd term and losing the 3 biggest counties in the state, having only an 8-point margin. Russ Fulcher was not well known coming into this. I think that Fulcher ran a really effective campaign and pointed out a lot of deficiencies in Otter's record as governor that could come back to haunt him in the fall campaign. But that's going to be interesting.
It would be interesting to ask Raoul Labrador if he has second thoughts about not having run this time around.
Well, one of the questions that I had after looking at it, Governor Otter did really, really well in rural counties, whereas Fulcher did really well in highly populated counties. Can somebody realistically coming out of the legislature have enough time to campaign in these smaller counties and reach out the way that Governor Otter and Lieutenant Governor Little were able to do?
It's pretty difficult for a person who's in the legislature to come out and do it in the May primary. That's always been the talk, that the timing of the May primary is for quote-unquote incumbents. But Senator Fulcher came out fairly early. Certainly Governor Otter, and certainly I supported him and would have liked to see a bigger margin, but he still won fairly comfortably. Certainly some of the counties. The governor he's done a fine job when the economy was bad, and Idaho hasn't done, but there's not a legacy initiative yet going there. And as we come out of this, maybe there will be, but there'll be, now you have to have the stark, what's the contrast between A.J. Belukoff and Governor Otter? So the focus kind of really changes. You're not going to have disputes about Obamacare or Common Core. So Belukoff's going to come on the record and the economy and things shouldn't change, or education, but they seem to agree on the recommendations too. So it's going to be interesting to see the strategy of both sides in the upcoming November election.
Melissa, as far as the rural counties, I don't think we should overlook the effect of something that Governor Otter has done since he was elected, and that is holding so-called Capital for a Day sessions in some little town out in the middle of nowhere. And he has done 70-something of these, I think close to 75. He has been to every corner of the state, spent an entire day, brought his whole cabinet, invited everybody in this little town to come tell him what they were concerned about. And, oh, well, here's my transportation director, here's my health and welfare director, get their concerns addressed on the spot, and that was the governor. He was in their little town. That had to be effective, and I think we saw that strength in those rural counties.
I think Betsy hits on a good thing there. You won't find a better retail politician than Governor Otter, and I've gone to some of those Capital for a Days, and he's very good at it, one-on-one with the people going to those communities. You also got to remember, the rural counties usually have a little better turnout too than the other ones. So the large counties that were involved that he lost, and Kootenai was a fairly big loss, but Canyon was close, and Ada County is close. So I wouldn't take too much stock in that. I think that had more to do with the base coming out again and 21% turnout.
Could the governor have done any better if he had come out of the gates a little faster than he did? It just seemed like we saw a lot of spending, campaign signs up for Fulcher, and yet it took a while for Governor Otter to really get out there. We probably within the last 2 weeks we saw his first campaign ads on television.
It was really, really late when he began his campaign, and I think that was calculated. I think that he chose kind of a rose garden strategy. I'm the governor, I'm too busy governing to dirty my hands with this campaigning stuff, and I think in the end it kind of paid off for him.
So you were, on Wednesday, after all of the results came through, there was a unity rally on the State House steps. You were there, and all of the big ticket Republicans were there saying that we are one party, we're united, and we're going to attack the general election. But how much do you buy into that? Because there are still these lingering questions about Common Core and Obamacare.
For the most part, the unity rally, and that's why we have it, is just to get in there and kumbaya, let's beat the Democrats in November. Are there still issues that divide the party? Certainly there are, but there's a lot more issues you can agree on than disagree on, and I think we'll get into it a little later. There's a big event coming in June in Moscow with the state convention, and which does the platforms. Of course, some folks say either party's platform is ignored as soon as they leave the convention, but that may be true. But the fight for the Republican Party starts on the precinct level, and what happened, and who's going to be there at the organizational meetings, who's going to be in the leadership, what kind of platforms and resolutions are they going to pass, and it's going to be very interesting to watch for all those political geeks in Moscow in June.
And we'll be there, actually, so I look forward to that. and you had something to add about the precinct.
Ben has to be careful about what he says, but the truth is, coming out of this primary, there are still deep divisions in the party, and Fulcher stood up and said the right things at the Unity rally on Tuesday, but we have a story in this weekend Statesman that's going to look at some of those precinct votes and where the control of the party might lie. I think it's still too early to say. I think there's 900 and some odd seats that have to be counted, and I think each side is still tallying who won. But I know that Raul Labrador, who is basically the unacclaimed leader of the conservative wing of the party, is still very critical of the governor. And I think you're going to see that wing of the party asking for concessions. And one thing that we're hearing and is possible is that Russ Fulcher might be a consensus Republican Party chairman, might bring those two factions together if Otter and Fulcher can agree to disagree on some of the things that have divided them and move ahead for the benefit of the party.
Ben, in your point of view, does that deepen the divide or does that help with unity? If you have somebody who disagrees vehemently with Governor Otter as the chairman of the Republican Party, just briefly.
Call me old school, but I think the head of the Republican Party, or the head of anybody's party, ought to reflect the wishes of the sitting governor, who is supposed to be the head of the party. And but we've had those internal divisions, obviously, especially, you can talk about Sandpoint and whatever. But I think the governor is thinking long and hard about his preferred choice for that, and will thoroughly vet the candidates that come forth. But I think that whole makeup, the organizational, you can talk about what happened in Kootenai County, you can talk about Ada County. I heard there was a net gain, but there was a net loss in Kootenai, and what the other counties are. So it remains to be seen what will happen there. But call me old school, but I think the party chairman should reflect the views of the sitting governor.
Can I jump in and just say that Chairman Peterson did win his precinct battle in Elmore County,
yes.
and that was up in the air, and he does want to return as chairman. So that's another factor in this whole discussion.
Yeah. Let's turn real quickly though to the legislative races, and there were some surprises. Let's start up north. And Betsy, there was a few changes in names up there.
Absolutely. The trend that we saw statewide, where the insurgent wing that tried to take over the party from the right failed at the top of the ticket, but they succeeded in North Idaho. And we saw significant losses among incumbents there. John Getty, chairman of the Senate Education Committee, lost to Mary Sousa, a local city hall critic who earlier lost badly in an election for mayor. Ed Morse, the guy who beat Phil Hart, he was defeated in this election by a candidate from the right. And George Eskridge, long-serving representative from way up north in District 1, and he lost to a Tea Party candidate. And there was very low turnout up north, and I've talked with candidates, and what they were hearing when they were campaigning was that the voters basically had no sense of what the issues really were at the state level and were really focused on federal issues and very local issues. And so if they got the sense that there's one candidate who, in the words of their opponent, brought Obamacare into the state, maybe isn't sufficiently in favor of guns and against abortion, well, then they were going to vote against that candidate.
Do you think the states' rights and the federal lands issue played a role in those North Idaho races?
I do, and I don't think that those decisions were really made necessarily on the basis of the records of the incumbents or the issues that the newly elected people will be taking up.
And there were incumbents who lost elsewhere in the state too. Lenore Hardy Barrett, Monty Pierce, Doug Hansey. What were some of the factors in those races? Because in at least one case, in two cases, they were further right candidates who lost.
Well, I can't speak to all of those, but I do know that the Statesman's reporting has shown that in some of those cases, including Monty Pierce's race in western Idaho, there were some concerns about how far right, how anti-environment he may have been. He ran against an articulate candidate who is a spokesman for the community college there. She had the endorsement of the ICL. There was some question of whether the pro-environment support ended up creating a backlash for her. But in the end, Monty Pierce didn't survive that challenge. It's hard to say what exactly happened up in central Idaho with Lenore Barrett. It's hard to think that she wasn't conservative enough. So some people were criticizing her on the wolf issue. So I think in that case it was an articulate candidate who put together a really smart campaign and ultimately had support of the environmental groups there too.
Well, briefly, if it weren't for the Republican primary, just in 10 seconds, would these results have been different without the closed primary?
Without the closed primary? That's a difficult question to answer because, I think the closed primary causes a lower turnout, but some of our open primaries, like I indicated earlier, have not been great in turnout either. I do think in some of those pockets it could have made a difference.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you all for coming in and helping us out this week on Idaho Reports. And we'll be back here next Friday. Hope to see you then. Good night.
Presentation of Idaho Reports on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.